Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
This is Captain Gary Gore, a 727 pilot for United Airlines with nearly 13,000 hours. In the late spring of 1984, he was involved in a very serious microburst wind shear encounter at Denver's Stapleton International Airport. This is how he remembers that day.
Well, that morning, as I was driving to the airport, I happened to notice the mountains to the west were starting to pick up some lenticular cloud formations. And later on in dispatch, as I was reviewing the weather forecast, they indeed had forecast virga to be forming in the area later on that afternoon. Also a possibility of wind shears in the Denver area. When I walked out to the aircraft, I noticed the area was developing quite a few virga clouds. And I checked with my engineer to see what weather was as reported by the AKwx information. He said they reported gusty winds in the area, predominantly out of the west, and they were using runway 35 left at Denver, which is over 10,000-foot runway. And we went ahead with a normal pushback, and as we taxied around the east end of the building, found about 18 aircraft in front of us waiting for departure. The ground control told us to stay with them and get in the line, and when it became our turn to move over to the run-up area, the south end of 35 left, that would be the time they'd switch us over to the departure tower frequency. I elected to use 5 degrees of flap for our takeoff and told them to plan for a normal EPR, and when we got out to the runway, we would decide whether or not we would use the maximum EPR if conditions required it. There was fairly darkening lower level clouds coming in, and we could see some virga further up towards the north and the northwest of the airport. Nothing around the actual airport vicinity. We spotted some dust blowing about midfield point on the runway, and we discussed that in some length, and all recalled that they were doing some dirt moving and construction in that area, and that it indicated that there's fairly good wind blowing there, but nothing of any concern. About that time, I heard a Rocky Mountain Dash 7 call to the tower that he'd had a 20-knot loss on climb out. And as I looked out the front of the cockpit window, I could see the Dash 7 was about the midfield point where we'd spotted the dirt blowing. And he looked to be about 200 to 300 feet above the ground. I then proceeded to brief the rest of my flight crew that due to the look at the sky conditions and that, we would still be using the 5-degree flap takeoff, that we would use maximum EPR for the takeoff, and then the tower cleared us to follow the next aircraft onto the runway. I turned on the color radar and observed and brought to the attention of the rest of the crew that we had a very strong cell with a red center, approximately 35 miles northeast of the airport. But since everything was moving from west to east, that it would not be a factor. We'd be turning to the northwest away from it anyway. At that point, we were lined up on the runway, and tower cleared us for takeoff. Said your north field wind is 270. It figures about approximately 8 knots. your midfield wind is 270 at 20, gusting to something like 28, which correlated with the wind that was blowing across the runway and all that dirt at midfield point. And your south field wind is 260 at approximately 9. So I told the rest of the crew, I said, well, that looks okay. Set takeoff thrust and move the throttles up to the max EPR setting for the takeoff power. So we continue with the normal takeoff, and about the point where we've been observing the blowing dirt and where we thought the 20 gust and the 30 knot wind was located, the co-pilot called out. He says, got an airspeed hesitation here at 120 knots. And I looked down, and as soon as I looked down, the airspeed was starting to, he says, oh, disregard it. He says, the airspeed's accelerating again. We continue with a normal takeoff roll and acceleration into VR. I started bringing the aircraft nose up, and I had about 9 to 10 degrees of body angle. When we just about reached V2, co-pilot called my attention again. He says, the airspeed's starting to decay. I glanced down to see the airspeed starting to move back towards VR. I reached over and I called for firewall power, and the co-pilot followed up on my push, and we had the throttles maximum forward. At that time, the flight engineer called out, you've lost 20 knots. I looked down and observed the airspeed had actually decreased 20 knots from our V2 speed, and we're now starting back. It was about 10 knots below what our VR speed had been. I checked the rotation at about the 9-degree point we had, and I realized that we were committed and had to try and get the airplane off the ground, and I continued with the rotation, noting that the V speed was still about, we're about 2 to 4 knots below VR speed, but continue with the rotation. At about the point when we had an 18-degree body angle or so, all of a sudden the airspeed shot up at the same time that the airplane suddenly left the ground. My engineer was calling out our good body attitude, and airspeed was increasing, and at that point we had a normal climb out, except very bumpy and rocky. As we're about 9,500 feet, my engineer called out that he was having a problem to pressurize the aircraft. So then I advised the co-pilot, tell ATC that we cannot pressurize the aircraft. We'd like to return to Denver, and that we would be not requiring any assistance because it was just a pressurization problem. We then went ahead and had a normal approach and landing in Denver, and then taxied into the gate, shut the aircraft down, and went through the shutdown procedure. And about that time, I noticed quite a few of the ramp people coming out and scurrying over to look at towards the back of the aircraft. My co-pilot asked, would it be okay if he went back there to see what everybody was going back to look at? And I said, yeah, go ahead. And I said, I'll help the engineer write up the problem with the pressurization. But shortly after that, my co-pilot came back and he said, I think we found the pressurization problem. And I said, oh, how come so fast? He says, well, it seems we got a piece of red and white antenna sticking in the belly of the airplane.
The antenna referred to by Captain Gore was located nearly 1,200 feet beyond the end of the runway and was broken off only 13 feet above the ground, dramatic proof of the potentially devastating consequences of a microburst encounter. Like Captain Gore's experience, many times the warning signs may not be absolute, so be alert to the sum total of all indicators. On takeoff or landing, if you do suspect wind shear, consider your runway selection or a short delay until conditions are more favorable. If you do make a go decision, either to take off or land, consider the options available to increase the performance of your airplane, such as your flap setting and your speed margin. If you do find yourself in a severe low-altitude wind shear during takeoff or landing, anticipate increased performance as you enter the headwind portion of the shear, followed by suddenly decreasing performance as you transition into the downdraft and tailwind segments of the shear. In this situation, you must respond quickly and correctly to avoid an accident. Increased thrust may be required all the way to full forward throttles. And trading speed for altitude by increasing your pitch attitude as necessary up to stick shaker speed may allow you to maintain or establish a positive flight path. Now, let's sum things up. The relative rarity of severe low-level wind shear encounters may in effect increase their potential as a hazard. Be prepared when you're operating in areas where the potential for wind shear exists. Be alert not only to low-level wind shear alerts from ATC, but also to PIREPs from other flights. And remember, you are an important part of this information process. If you suspect wind shear, report it. Although your encounter may have been minor, the changing nature of the phenomenon could make that encounter critical for a subsequent flight. Review your operating procedures on a regular basis and know the performance limits of your aircraft. So if you find yourself in an emergency situation, you can respond promptly and correctly. Remember, there have been documented cases of wind shear which no aircraft has the capability to successfully traverse.
We're going to have a live call-in quiz here about how many of those airlines are still in existence today after the show, so make sure you let us know. Welcome to Alaska Weather. Sorry for the strange start off there, but here we are, and the date, of course, April 26th. Welcome you to Alaska's Weather Show. The weather info line's open at 800-472-0391. Don't try and tell us your favorite airline there because we won't be listening. It's a weather reporting line. We'll tell you all about it, but can't really take any comments back. You can always let us know what you're seeing, though, along your favorite river and in your village as breakup continues, especially along the Yukon and northward on NWS Alaska, on Twitter, and using the hashtag AKwx. It's a great way to let us know that you are talking about Alaska weather no matter where you are. And on YouTube, find your daily afternoon map briefing on NWS Anchorage, or look for this entire show, including that really old airline segment on AKwx TV, if you search for that in your Google search history or on YouTube.com. On to breakup. You can see all the way from tip to tail, just about. The Yukon is still color-coded as mostly ice, but late last night we got a really important update from Eagle that the ice was starting to move and the water was coming up a little bit as the ice has been moving around. We've seen a lot of changes today around Eagle, and watch for more changes downstream as conditions are beginning to change from the Yukon westward now across the Alcan border, and look for that to travel downstream in the coming days there. So watch for updates on this map, and you can check this any time of day you want. And as conditions are updated, we will update the map at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, weather.gov/APRFC. Another way to get there, aprfc.arh.noaa.gov. This was last updated around 9:30 this morning, and conditions have been changing all day, so watch for that. You'll notice anywhere south of the Tanana Valley and into the Susitna Valley, Copper River, and into the Kuskokwim, things are open and things are moving there. We've seen a few changes around Russian Mission and then westward around Marshall. So it's already some changes in that regard too, but probably going to see significant changes in the next week or so up and down the Yukon. So be ready, be aware, and let us know what you're seeing. It really helps. You can do that easily by going to NWS Alaska or NWS APRFC on Twitter. Information coming out there. If you use the hashtag AKRiverWatch, that's a great way to kind of collect your information that way. So we love that. Call the forecasters there at the River Center at 800-847-1739 or email, the old-fashioned way, right? nws.ar.aprfc@noaa.gov. And once again, that website to check on the latest conditions right there, weather.gov/aprfc. I think that might even be my hand. Yep, look at that. Pretty cool. On to the weather. Here is the visible satellite picture. We are now in that time of the year where we can show you my favorite forecasting tool. If you are really wanting to check out something, go online, go to weather.gov and click on the satellite picture and look at the lower 48. They had a huge line of thunderstorms today. Not the case over Alaska, but you can see a pretty broad area of low pressure across the Gulf, really not too unusual after the weather pattern we've seen so far. And we also have low pressure sitting right here across the Alcan border, north of Northway and south of Eagle, and another wave of that sitting across the northern part of the Yukon Delta. All that is to say that we've got a warm air developing across the interior, and we have some instability that we've been kind of watching for shower development today. Haven't seen a whole lot on the lightning tracker across the region, but certainly bears watching, especially as we get into tomorrow and again into Thursday. And the places to watch will be here around Northway to Dawson and east of Fairbanks toward Eagle, and then probably on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. It's getting into that type of heat and that type of summery kind of weather that could build those towering showers and maybe even spark a few lightning strikes there. So something to keep watch on there. You'll notice a lot of low clouds across the west and across the Aleutians. Not a whole lot of wet weather to report. Most of that's been focused across southeast today, across south central, and certainly Prince William Sound. Got a good soaker around Whittier, and well, some would even call it a toad strangler around Seward today. Fairly wet day in some cases on the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, and out across the west, things really dried up as the air moving over the Alaska Range was drying out as it headed out to sea. It's also moving the ice around quite a bit. If you're in the Bering Sea or on the west coast, you know that to be the case. The ice pack is diminishing rapidly there, and changes continue to move that ice pack south and west and kind of stretch that out and melt it even more as it's on the move. The North Slope still looking at snow and poor visibility from time to time. No big changes in your future there. Here's the weather map. Low pressure stretching all the way from the eastern Gulf to the western mountains and then over southwestern Alaska. Another wave of low pressure approaching the central Aleutians at 976 millibars. As we get into tonight, pockets of rain and snow showers are possible across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. Doesn't look like anything too terribly wet. Periods of rain and drizzle across southeast and across the Gulf Coast communities as the frontal boundary works up across the central and eastern chain at 978 millibars. Watch for some pockets of light snow or flurries across the North Slope. As we get into Wednesday, a few areas of low clouds and flurries there across the north. Here's the thunderstorm activity we're watching for. It's not a sure thing, of course, but the signs for potential development are there, and we're only talking about a few storms, so nothing really very widespread at all. Showers are possible all the way across the western Alaska Range and into southwestern Alaska. Better chance for light rain for the central and eastern Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, the Gulf Coast, and all the way into southeastern Alaska. Another wave of rain will work northward as the frontal boundary dissipates here. You'll notice that moving into the Kenai Peninsula. Better chance for showers on the Prince William Sound side, of course, and then moving into southeast, light rainfall there. And possibility for some more thunderstorms along the middle and upper Yukon Valley as we head into Thursday, and notice a lot of clearing here. In this case, with warm southerly flow and dry air, that probably means another warm day coming for the interior. Pockets of fog and flurries for the North Slope and showers for the Aleutians with a 989 millibar low south and west of Sandpoint. Temps today, we're in the 40s and 50s across the region, 51 around Haines. As you get down towards Sitka, Craig, and Klawock, temperatures were also hovering near 50. 40s and 50s for Prince William Sound, 52 in Anchorage and up toward Cantwell, 58 in Talkeetna, 63 in Fairbanks, another warm one today, 54 in Eagle, 46 for Fort Yukon, 20s for the North Slope, 24 in Barrow, and 28 in Kaktovik. Ambler was showing 46, Shishmaref 30, 45 in Nome and Unalakleet. McGrath had 62, 54 in Bethel, 43 in Nunivak Island, and as you head into southwest and Bristol Bay, 40s and 50s there for King Salmon and Dillingham, 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, with upper 30s and lower 40s for the central and western chain. St. Paul was 44 and looking for a low tonight of 38. South Central should see temps stay above freezing tonight. Kodiak Island in the 40s, 30s and 40s for southeast, with the middle Tanana Valley just shy of 40 around Fairbanks. The North Slope in the teens to low 20s even, so a mild night for you, and 32 in Nome with highs tomorrow in the 40s there. 20 around Barrow, 40s and 50s for the upper Yukon Valley, middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks, back to the mid-50s to near 60 degrees. South Central a hair cooler, but not by much. Prince William Sound in the lower 50s, mid-40s for Kodiak Island, upper 40s and low 50s for southeast. And the chain, the Alaska Peninsula, the Pribilofs, all in the 40s. Bristol Bay, though, could see temps closing in on 60 degrees, with Bethel looking at the mid-50s, and again, Nome around 43. Flying weather, we'll see IFR across the North Slope tomorrow, stretching all the way through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and St. Matthew. with a ring of IFR expected across the central Aleutians moving around that low pressure system. Pockets of IFR across Haines and Skagway and the Chilkoot and White Pass region. Watch for the changes tomorrow, though. Some improvements for southeast. MVFR lingers around Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf, and that ribbon of IFR is going to stretch out for the central chain all the way into Sand Point and south of Kodiak Island and staying close to the Yukon Delta and through the Bering Strait. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will improve throughout the day. Rainy Pass, we expect to see VFR by the end of the day there, so some improvements there. Windy Pass, expect to be visual flight rule through most of the day. Isabel Pass probably starting out at MVFR. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR throughout the day. Tanita Pass looking pretty good through most of your Wednesday. Portage Pass lingering around MVFR through most of the midweek. And IFR conditions are expected to start, as we saw, on Chilkoot and White Pass. Freezing levels show that warm air is lifting north at the surface right along the Yukon Valley there, and you can see there is some warm air aloft hovering at least at 4,000 feet across the same region. Slightly cooler weather, though, lingering over the Talkeetnas to the Chugach Range, and 4,000-foot freezing lines there hovering over southeast. Icing potential will be hit and miss, and most of that will be above 4,000 feet to reach isolated moderate north of the Yukon Valley and south of the Brooks Range summits, and then across the Gulf and over the Sand Point region to just east of Dutch Harbor in Unalaska, generally above 4,000 feet for your daytime tomorrow. The jet stream shows our super high wave weather is still well south of the Aleutians, and it's allowing most of the storm energy to stay out of Alaska. But we do have some faster moving areas of wind moving off of Alaska across the west coast. That's around 60 knots or so. And it's encouraging the wind to move away and over the mountains, so any wet air that's moving north dries out and moves westward. That's also encouraging that warmer air to move north, all the way from the Gulf of Alaska, where wind speeds are at 50 knots and diminishing to about 15 knots as they move over the North Slope. A broad southerly flow continues for the central and eastern Gulf and over the Alaska Range, where wind speeds are reaching the middle Tanana Valley at 3,000 feet, around 20 knots or so, and east to northeast winds are coming off the west coast at about 10 to 15 knots in most cases. They're a little faster across the Alaska Peninsula, about 25 to 35. Turbulence then across the northern Gulf should be expected, a generally isolated moderate, but you might find some occasional bumps there below 6,000 feet and across Bristol Bay and into the Alaska Peninsula to the Pribilofs below 4,000 feet for your daytime tomorrow. We're going to move right on into marines here, and here's the sea surface temperatures. You can see all that warm water already curving up and across the northern Gulf, though the sea surface temperatures in this case running around 10 degrees C, but there's still plenty of cold out there capable of supporting ice. The trouble is a lot of that is breaking up very quickly with that broad northeasterly flow pushing warm air there. A lot of that is melting quickly, and once again, as we saw yesterday, Norton Sound is pretty much sea ice free. There is some shore-fast ice, but it is rotting very quickly and unstable. There's also a lot of open water there north of Etolan Strait, north of Nunivak Island, and north of St. Matthew Island. You can see some higher concentration ice, though painted in white. That's above 80% concentration, but this has nothing to do with thickness, so be extra careful if you're headed out. Here's your Wednesday forecast now for southeast. Wind speeds between 15 and 20 knots from the southeast on the inside and about 20 to 35 across the outside. South and southeast winds there will bring seas up to about 13 feet on Wednesday. For Thursday, winds come up a little bit more inside the Clarence Strait to 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. Look for 14-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance, and then south of Yakutat and Icy Cape, 35 knots brings seas to about 13 feet. In the Lynn Canal, 15-knot winds there from the south. Across the northern Gulf and the west, you'll see winds from the east for most cases there, 15 knots inside of Prince William Sound, blowing from east to west across the western Gulf. 30 to 35, and a northeasterly flow coming down Cook Inlet and going all the way into Shelikof Strait. We'll start at 15 knots in the north and strengthen to about 30 to 35 west of the Barrens and into Shelikof. Look for a 9-foot sea there on Wednesday. Winds will start to switch around in Shelikof on Thursday. A southwesterly wind at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. South and easterly winds blowing into the north and western Gulf. Winds from the east in Prince William Sound at 25 knots, and the northeasterly flow continues in northern Cook Inlet on Thursday. And across the Alaska Peninsula, broad easterlies sweeping across the region south of Kodiak Island and into Bristol Bay. Look for a 25 to 30 knot wind. 9 to 10-foot seas on the Pacific coast and 5 to 8-foot seas in the Bering Sea coast for Wednesday. Those will linger around 9 feet inside of Bristol Bay with that easterly flow at 25 knots Thursday, diminishing down the Bering Sea coast, and south and southwesterlies develop across the Pacific coast at 20 to 25 with 12 to 14-foot seas. For the Aleutians, northerlies for the central and western chain, around 25 knots, 10 to 11-foot seas there. You'll notice the changing winds from Atka eastward all the way to Nikolsky and Unalaska, about 15 to 25. Seas will be changing from Nikolsky to Atka, about 9 to 14 feet, and they'll come down even more as we get into Thursday, looking for a northwesterly flow, bringing them down to about 11 feet, but 14-foot seas continue south of Nikolsky to Unalaska. Northerly set in for most areas, though. About 15 to 20 knot winds are expected with 7 to 8-foot seas in the west by the end of Thursday afternoon. North and easterly winds coming out of the Bering Strait at 20 to 35 knots will produce 4 to 6-foot seas in the open waters there. 2-foot seas north of Nunivak Island and 8-foot seas from Kuskokwim all the way to the St. Paul and St. George waters there, with seas brought to you by that 25 to 30 knot wind from the east. For Thursday, a little bit of a shift, but not much. 20 to 25 knots in the northern Bering and 25 knots from the Kuskokwim Delta all the way to the Pribilofs, with 6 to 9-foot seas there, still holding on a 25-knot wind from the north and east. For the North Slope, easterlies blowing across the Beaufort Seacoast, still over the ice, 20 to 25 there. North and easterly winds coming down the Chukchi Sea, 15 to as strong as 35 outside of the Kotzebue Sound region from the north. For Thursday, northerlies coming through the Chukchi Sea coast, 15 to 25, and easterlies over Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik at about 15 to 20. Recapping tonight's weather, here's a look at what we see. A low pressure sitting south of the central chain at 978 millibars is pushing a frontal boundary north and toward the Alaska Peninsula. There may be some pockets of showers in the interior, and some of that could be mixed with snow. There's a much better chance for a light rain or drizzle across the Gulf Coast and across southeast. As we get into Wednesday, low pressure won't move very much, but the front is going to move quickly across the Gulf. We'll also be watching for a chance for a few thunderstorms across the Alcan border and close to Eagle and Northway in that general vicinity. Areas of fog and flurries possible across the North Slope. For Thursday, the front's dying out, but the rain is still hovering across the coastal areas, and there's a slightly better chance for a few more storms across the central and upper Yukon Valley. Thanks for watching tonight. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.